Hey YouTube, this is Raging Phoenix, and this is the first episode of my gaming review. And in the first episode, I'm going to be reviewing Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. So, to get started, basically, I'm going to be going over differences between the original on the N64 and the and this version, comparisons to different Zelda games, and whether I would recommend it to anybody or not, or if I like the game, things like that. So to get started, um, I feel as though the um, Zelda Majora's Mask 3D is a little easier than the original because the fact that they added a Sheikah Stone, which it gives you hints on parts that you've passed by, such as if you're in the temple and you reach a certain point, or if you're doing things to get to a temple, and let's say you get stuck somewhere, you could go to this Sheikah Stone, and it'll give you a short clip on what to do, basically. Excuse me. And I'm not a huge fan of that, just because I feel it makes the game too easy, because it basically gives you hints on just about everything, where heart containers are, what you need to do this or do that, or how to get these fairies. And for those who don't know, in Majora's Mask, in every temple there are 15 fairies, and once collecting said 15 fairies and returning it to the fairy fountain, you get things such as the first one, you get double magic. I think it's the first one. The second one, you get a greater spin attack. Third one, you get double defense. And the fourth one, you get a fairy sword. Um, which they changed some of the fairies' locations too. And for me, who's played the original, it threw me off some of the things that they did that they changed, such as certain fairy locations, or even they changed the banker from being in West Clocktown to South Clocktown, and they made it so you don't have to use the sword to open up a owl statue, and that there's more save stations now, which I actually do like that they added more save stations, because not everybody wants to go on this long trek just to find a save station. Um, but besides some of those minor changes, overall, I still think it's an amazing game, and I would recommend it to people. And usually with handheld games, at least I noticed for Zelda, they they made it easier just for they make the handheld games easier than the console games, just because um, I assume it's because it the how the console can handle more than a handheld can, and that usually kids who have people who have handhelds are usually kids and stuff, or at least that's what they wanted to target, I guess, in my opinion. So they would make, in my opinion, they would just make it easier than a console game, which usually people around their older teens and 20s and stuff would have a console such as a Wii U or PS4 or things like that. So for a Zelda game on the console, that I feel that's why they make it harder on the console, because they're targeting it more towards teens and 20s and older people, whereas handhelds, it's usually for the younger crowd, or at least I guess that's their intent. So I understand why they made it a bit easier, but I still like that for the most part. It's still the same game, and I do enjoy their visual updates. But one thing is that the moon, I'll try to show you. I think it's a little too dark in my room, but let me see where it is. The moon. Yeah, it's too dark. Sorry, guys, but the moon looks like Shrek, in my opinion, um, and that's weird. But I would recommend it. I feel um, if you haven't played Ocarina of Time yet, I feel you should play it just because it somewhat um, explains the story. Because I feel if you haven't played Ocarina of Time and you just jump into Majora's Mask, in the beginning you'll just kind of wonder what exactly is going on. Just, oh, what do you mean he's looking for a friend, or who? Why is he saying bye to Zelda? All stuff like that. Um, little backtrack in the Zelda train is Zelda came out in 1986, the first Zelda game, which I believe technically wasn't the first Zelda game. They had one before that they erased from the Zelda timeline. But the first released Zelda game is Zelda 1 1986. I believe it came out in 1987 for the US, but it came out in 1986 in Japan. And then Majora's Mask came out in 2000. Ocarina of Time came out in 1998. Um, I know the story time the Zelda timeline pretty well of when they were released and the timeline in general, people's theories on things, all that. And I'm kind of basically like the Zelda historian in a way. I've played every Zelda game, beaten them. Um, just good with Zelda games. But for people who don't have a lot of time to sit down at a console or something of that sort, then the 3DS version would be better. Obviously, um, and I do feel that if you haven't played Ocarina of Time, you should play that one first before playing Majora's Mask. But you don't have to. It's not like it's gonna affect anything. Um, I say that because there are Oracle of Seasons and Ages. Um, Originally, when they were made, you had to beat one to play the other, but they made it so that it's optional. But the fact that if you didn't beat one or if you didn't use the code, it alternated the outcome of the story basically. So if you beat one and then you put in the code for the other one, then the game recognizes it and then basically unlocks the storyline to follow that storyline. But if you didn't use the code, most of it was the same, but it started to veer off track of what would have been the storyline if you used the code. Excuse me. Um, but with Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, you don't have to worry about that. So you don't have to play Ocarina of Time first. But I just feel it would explain the beginning at least, in a vague sense of explaining things. But I feel that it would be good. But also the Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time are very popular among Zelda fans. So Majora's Mask being notorious for being hard, or just a lot of people not liking it in general. Ocarina of Time being most people's favorite. I love Majora's Mask. Um, I love the difficulty, so that's why it's one of my favorite Zelda games. But yeah, I definitely would just not necessarily just these games, Majora's Mask, but any Zelda game really. I feel would be good. Um, and the more difficult you want, I would say go to the older Zelda games, such as Zelda 1, Zelda 2. Those are really difficult, in a fun way, in my opinion. But if you want a game that feels a little more connected to a story, then play some of the quote unquote newer ones. Pretty much the first Zelda game or two, they kind of just throw you into the game, save Zelda, and more of the later ones, there's a bit more of a story saying, oh, look, this is why you're trying to save this dumb bitch. Um, or even for the some of the ones that don't even have Zelda in it, and you're trying to save somebody else, there's more of the story in the game where there's explanations to things, not just you running around being told to get certain things. There's more stories in like Majora's Mask. There's the whole story of why the Skull Kid is doing what he's doing, and that snazzy stuff. So just depending on how hard you want the game to be, or whether or not you want to, um, whether or not you have the time to play on the console or handheld will determine which game you should get, in my opinion. But overall, I would recommend anybody to play a Zelda game that hasn't played too many Zelda games, because I know there are plenty of people out there who know of Zelda games, the series, but haven't gotten to play it, or have played maybe one or two Zelda games and enjoyed it but haven't gotten to play more, or haven't completed a game, but stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, it's a fun game, and for the next game review, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to review, but it may or may not be another Zelda game, or maybe Super Smash, since that game is also a sort of recent release. Um, Either that or Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Um, just games that's been out for a little bit but are relatively new. I'm gonna cover, and I might go to older games that, because Majora's Mask has been out for 15 years, but they 3D is the remake of it. Um, so that game has been out for a while, but since not everybody who's like 15 and younger may probably haven't played it until now, or don't even really know too much about Zelda, so I'm probably I may cover old games too, and the next episode of game reviews will probably be one of those games, but if not, um, it'll it'll be a surprise, sort of, not really, but it's unknown. Um, Till next time, the phoenix is rising from the ashes. Catch you later.